Hi, so we've just got back from bikepacking the Pennine Bridleway, and I just wanted to share with you our experiences along the way, highs and the lows, our equipment that we used, and our enjoyment and overall rating of the Pennine Bridleway. So essentially it's a trail which links Peak District near Matlock all the way north to the top of the Yorkshire Dales. So it starts near Matlock and finishes at Kirby Stephen. The trail runs for approximately 190 miles. There is different sections that you can do. So there's one loop around Manchester called the Mary Townley Loop, and then there's a smaller loop up around Settle of around about 10-15 miles. But most people will start in the south near Matlock and travel north 190 miles as we did over the last 4 days, and finishing up near Kirby Stephen. So what type of trails are we expecting to find along the way? Well, there's a big mixture really. The first thing to say is the views are absolutely breathtaking. Whether that be in the sandstones of the Peak District all the way up to the limestone pavements in the Yorkshire Dales, especially as you start hitting Settle and further north. The trails will range from single track, road sections, gravel, sandstone, grassy paths, you name it essentially. I would say that we're going to be riding off-road around about 85% of the time. So the burning question, how long should you take to do the Pennine Bridleway? Well, it really depends on your fitness level and how enjoyable you want it to be in terms of the experience and essentially how long you've got off work. Most people would do it between 4 and 7 days. In terms of the services along the way, well, we decided to wild camp, which we'll go into in a few moments. But there's lots of services, there's lots of official campsites, especially in the northern in the Yorkshire Dales, although they do get very, very busy in summer, so I would recommend you pre-book them. The route goes through lots of small villages and towns, so you can quite easily go into an Airbnb, for example. And if you are wanting to wild camp, there's lots of amazing places to be able to do this. In terms of wild camping, we never experienced any problems in terms of trying to find somewhere. It'd be more advisable to find somewhere which is just a little bit off the trail, and as the saying goes, leave no trace if you're going to wild camp. In terms of water, we never had an issue. We did take with us a water filter. However, if you don't have a water filter, there's lots of outside taps on houses, you go through lots of villages, so you shouldn't really have a problem. How do you navigate around the Pennine Bridleway? So we used a GPS unit. This was a Garmin Explore. However, if you don't have a GPS unit, it's not a problem. Along the way, there's lots of marker posts, and these are really easy to follow. There's probably 1 or 2 sections around about the Manchester area where it gets a little bit more built up, where it could be useful to have a GPS because the marker posts are, I don't want to say few and far between, but they're a little bit harder to find. So food, as I mentioned, the route goes through lots of villages and towns, so you can quite easily be self-sufficient in terms of grabbing your meals. There's lots of pubs along routes, so if you wanted to stop for an evening meal, that's not a problem. Alternatively, wild camping, again, you can pop down into the villages or the small towns and quite easily fill your backpacks up for the evening, as we did. So yes, there are lots of hills on the Pennine Bridleway. Generally what we found is, although they are quite severe in terms of their gradient and there is a fair amount of hiker bike, you generally are awarded with a really good descent, which is fast and flowy. I didn't really find the route to climb for the sake of climbing, and as I said, the descents were really fantastic. There was 1 or 2 points where maybe you had to get off the bike just because the descents were a little bit rocky, but in the whole, the majority of it was rideable. What's the most optimal bike for the Pennine Bridleway? Well, I guess that depends on what bike you have, whether that be from a gravel, which would be ideal for the fast flowy trails, especially in the south, and as you start to come between Yorkshire and the further Dales, a gravel bike would be absolutely amazing. Myself, I had a Surly Ogre with 2.2 inch tyres. There's no suspension on this bike, and I actually found the bike to handle really, really well. It travelled up the hills very, very well. In the whole, I managed all of the descents without any issues. There were 1 or 2 points where I just jumped off the bike, very, very small sections. If you do have a hardtail mountain bike, then you probably will get the maximum enjoyment out of some of the descents. So, transportation to and from the start of the trail. We started at Matlock, which is easily accessible from the branch line train from Derby. These run very, very regular as Matlock is a tourist destination. The start of the route is at Middleton Top Visitors Centre. and runs all the way up to Kirkby Stephen, where there is a train station. What I would suggest is you might want to pre-book the train as you're coming back down from Kirkby Stephen, as they are actually few and far between within the day. There's maybe 3 or 4 from the start of the morning to the end of the evening. Bike spaces we've never found as an issue, although again the train operators do suggest that you pre-book. Generally most trains have a designated space for 2 bikes only. What's my overall difficult rating for this route? Well, I personally would say this was about an 8, maybe an 8.5. I never found the trail too difficult. Yes, some of the hills are quite hard and there is a certain amount of hiker bike, but in general the climbs are relatively limited in terms of overall length, and the majority of it is actually rideable. I think because the route flows very, very well and there's lots of undulating trails, it's a very enjoyable route. And as we pop down into towns and villages along the way, you're really able to be very self-sufficient on this bike. And if you are wanting to book into a pub, for example, for an evening meal or an Airbnb, you've got that option. So how would I rate the enjoyment of the Pennine Bridleway? Well, for me, this has probably got to be about a 9 out of 10. I really do enjoy the Pennine Bridleway. I'm fairly lucky enough to live towards the northern section of the Pennine Bridleway, so I do ride in it very, very regularly. The southern areas around the Peak District are just amazing for single tracks. There's lots of sandstone trails and the route just flows very, very, very well. Do I recommend you do the Pennine Bridleway? Absolutely. So thank you for watching. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more adventure bike content, please subscribe. Keep cycling adventures.